The Stolen Sonata and the Mafia King's Golden Cage. Being blindfolded by heavily armed mercenaries in the back of a luxury, bulletproof SUV was not part of the standard contract for a piano tuner. My name is Aria. I am 26 years old, and I live a completely invisible, reclusive life. I do not go to parties. I do not have friends. I hide in the quiet, dusty backrooms of concert halls and music shops, surrounded by tuning forks and tightened steel strings. I prefer the company of instruments to the company of human beings. Instruments make sense. If a string is pulled too tight, it snaps. If a human is pulled too tight, they do far worse. I possess a rare neurological condition called absolute pitch. I hear the entire world in musical notes. The hum of a refrigerator is a flat B. The screech of a subway train is an F sharp. Because of this, my hearing is incredibly sensitive, and my ability to tune a grand piano is considered flawless. That flawless reputation was exactly what got me kidnapped. The agency that managed my contracts told me it was a high-paying, anonymous client. They offered me $20,000 in cash just for a single afternoon of work. I desperately needed the money to pay off the crushing, massive medical debts my late mother had left behind. I agreed to the job. I did not expect the client to send a tactical team to collect me. When the blindfold was finally removed, my breath caught in my throat. I was standing in the center of an unbelievable, breathtakingly glamorous fortress. The estate was a masterpiece of modern, high-fashion architecture. The floors were polished black marble. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, looking out over a private, highly secured cliffside. Everywhere I looked, I saw expensive modern art, terrifyingly armed guards in tailored black suits, and the cold, terrifying gleam of immense, illegal wealth. I was standing in the private home of Dante Castillo. Dante Castillo was the ruthless, terrifying leader of the most powerful criminal syndicate on the coast. He was a ghost in the underworld, a man whispered about in terrified voices. When he walked down the grand, sweeping staircase to meet me, the air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Dante was devastatingly, breathtakingly handsome. He looked like a dark, fallen prince. He wore a bespoke, perfectly tailored charcoal suit that clung to his broad shoulders. His dark hair was perfectly styled. But his eyes were terrifying. They were completely black, devoid of any warmth, mercy, or human empathy. He radiated a lethal, predatory power that made my hands shake. "You are the tuner," Dante said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone. It was a perfect C-sharp. "Yes, Mr. Castillo," I whispered, clutching my leather toolkit tightly to my chest. "The piano is in the West Wing," he commanded, not offering a single pleasantry. "Do your job. Do not speak to my guards. Do not wander the halls. When you are finished, my men will blindfold you and return you to the city." He turned his back on me and walked away. I was escorted into a massive, gorgeous sunroom. Sitting in the center of the floor was a custom, incredibly rare black Steinway grand piano. It was a masterpiece of engineering. But when I struck the first key, I winced. The piano was horribly, terribly out of tune. It sounded like it had not been touched in years. I set my anxiety aside and went to work. For 3 hours, I lost myself in the absolute purity of the music. I tightened the steel strings. I adjusted the felt hammers. I listened to the microscopic vibrations of the sound waves, tuning the massive instrument back to perfect, flawless life. When the mechanical work was finally done, I needed to test the resonance of the keys. I closed my eyes. My fingers found their familiar places on the ivory keys. I did not play Mozart or Beethoven. Instead, I began to play a haunting, highly complex, obscure sonata that I had written myself years ago. It was a dark, emotional piece of music. I had written it to cope with my own severe, deep-rooted childhood trauma. The melody was sad, beautiful, and full of unresolved pain. I lost myself in the music. I poured all my hidden grief, my fear, and my loneliness into the heavy, echoing chords. I was so deeply immersed in the song that I did not hear the footsteps. Suddenly, a cold breeze brushed past my shoulder. I opened my eyes and stopped playing. My hands froze over the keys. Standing right beside the piano bench was a teenage boy. He looked about 15 years old. He was incredibly thin, with pale skin and messy dark hair. He was wearing silk pajamas. He stared at the piano keys with wide, empty eyes. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash behind me. I spun around. Standing in the doorway of the sunroom was Dante Castillo. He had dropped a crystal glass of whiskey onto the marble floor. The glass was shattered into 100 pieces. Dante was completely paralyzed. His terrifying, cold mask was gone. His handsome face was bone white. His chest heaved with panicked, shallow breaths. He was staring at the teenage boy as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. Behind Dante, 3 heavily armed guards stood frozen in absolute, terrified shock. One of them actually had his hand covering his mouth. I sat frozen on the piano bench, completely terrified. Had I broken a rule? Was I not allowed to play? The teenage boy ignored his terrifying father. He ignored the armed guards. He slowly, mechanically reached out his pale, trembling hand. He pressed a single, white ivory key. Ding! The note echoed in the massive, silent room. Dante let out a ragged, desperate sound. It sounded like a sob. He took a slow step into the room, raising his hands gently. "Milo?" Dante whispered. His lethal voice was cracking with pure, agonizing vulnerability. "Milo, baby, you walked down the stairs." The boy, Milo, did not look at his father. He just kept his empty eyes fixed on the piano keys. I realized the horrifying truth in that exact moment. I had read the dark rumors about Dante Castillo years ago. His wife had been brutally assassinated right in front of their child during a cartel war 5 years ago. The boy had survived, but his mind had completely shattered. Milo had been utterly mute and catatonic for half a decade. He had refused to leave his dark bedroom. Dante had spent millions of dollars on the best doctors, psychiatrists, and specialists in the world, trying to cure his broken son. Nothing had worked. Until today. Until my haunting, stolen Sonata pulled the boy out of his dark, mental prison. I slowly closed my leather toolkit. My hands were shaking violently. I stood up from the piano bench. I just wanted to take my money and run far away from this terrifying Mafia family. "I am finished, Mr. Castillo," I whispered, bowing my head. "The piano is tuned. I will leave now." I walked toward the doorway. But Dante Castillo moved with the terrifying, predatory speed of a panther. He stepped directly in front of the massive mahogany double doors. His broad, muscular shoulders completely blocked my exit. He looked down at me. The vulnerability in his face was entirely gone, replaced by a dark, obsessive, terrifying determination. "You are not going anywhere," Dante commanded. Chapter 1: The Golden Cage. "You are not going anywhere," Dante commanded. His deep, gravelly voice echoed in the massive, sunlit room. He stood directly in front of the heavy mahogany doors, his broad shoulders completely blocking my only exit. My heart hammered a lethal, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. "Mr. Castillo," I whispered, clutching my leather toolkit tightly to my chest like a shield. My contract was for one afternoon. I tuned the piano. "I need to go home." Dante did not move a single inch. His dark, ruthless eyes stared down at me. He looked at me not as a person, but as a priceless, highly valuable asset that he had just discovered. "My son has not taken a single step outside of his bedroom in 5 years, Dante said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "I have paid the most brilliant doctors in the world millions of dollars. They gave him pills. They gave him tests. None of it worked. His mind was locked away. Dante pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the grand piano, where the teenage boy, Milo, was still standing, staring blankly at the ivory keys. You played one song, Dante continued, his eyes burning with intense, dark obsession. And he walked down the stairs. You broke the lock. You are the key. I am just a piano tuner. I pleaded, my voice rising in panic. I don't know anything about psychology. It was an accident. I do not care what it was, Dante said coldly. He crossed his arms over his tailored, expensive suit. You work for me now. You are his permanent music therapist. No, I said, shaking my head violently. I refuse. You cannot keep me here against my will. This is kidnapping. Dante's handsome face hardened into a terrifying, lethal mask. He was a Mafia king. He was not used to being told no. I am not kidnapping you, Aria, Dante said smoothly. He stepped closer to me. He smelled like expensive cologne, dark espresso, and danger. I am offering you a new contract. An ironclad, extremely lucrative business arrangement. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit and pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times. Aria Hayes, Dante read aloud, his eyes fixed on me. 26 years old. No living relatives. You currently owe $450,000 in outstanding medical debts from your mother's cancer treatments. Your bank accounts are severely overdrawn. You are 3 weeks away from being evicted from your tiny apartment. My blood turned to absolute ice. He had pulled my entire life history in 30 seconds. Here is my offer, Dante said, lowering the phone. You will live in this estate. You will be provided with a private, luxury suite. You will play the piano for my son every single day. In exchange, I will instantly wipe away all of your debts. I will pay you $50,000 a month in clean, untraceable cash. You will never have to worry about money again for the rest of your life. He leaned in closer. His dark eyes locked onto mine, stripping away any illusion of a choice. But if you try to run, Dante whispered, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal frequency. If you try to leave this estate without my permission, I will find you. And the consequences will be severe. Do we have a deal? I looked at the terrifying cartel boss standing before me. Then, I looked past his shoulder at the pale, broken teenage boy standing by the piano. Milo looked so lost. He looked exactly how I felt inside. I had no money. I had no family to call the police. I was completely trapped. I took a deep, shaking breath. Deal. Chapter 2, Silk and Shadows. My new life inside the Castillo fortress was a bizarre, terrifying mixture of absolute luxury and suffocating imprisonment. I was given a massive, beautiful suite in the east wing of the estate. The room had floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the crashing, dark ocean. The bed was made of imported silk. The bathroom was entirely carved from white marble. When I opened the walk-in closet on my first morning, I gasped. It was completely filled with breathtaking, high-fashion clothing in my exact size. There were vintage-inspired, elegant dresses made of emerald silk, soft cashmere sweaters, and rows of expensive designer shoes. Dante did not want a dusty, messy piano tuner walking around his glamorous estate. He demanded perfection in every single detail of his life. I put on a soft, dark green vintage cut dress. I felt like a doll being dressed up for a very dangerous tea party. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 armed guards escorted me to the sunroom. Milo was already there. He was sitting on the piano bench, wearing a soft, gray sweater. He was staring blankly at the keys, his hands resting limply in his lap. I sat down gently beside him. I did not speak. I knew from my own deep trauma that forced conversation only pushed frightened people further into the dark. Instead, I placed my hands on the keys. I began to play. I played light, airy melodies. I played soft, classical sonatas. And occasionally, I wove in the dark, haunting, original piece that had first drawn him out of his room. I did this every single day for a month. Milo did not speak. He did not look at me. But slowly, incredibly slowly, I noticed tiny, microscopic changes. When I played a joyful, major chord, his breathing would calm down. When I played a sad, minor chord, his fingers would twitch. We were not talking with words. We were communicating entirely through the language of the keys. I was using my absolute pitch to read his emotional frequency. And every single day, Dante Castillo watched us. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, leaning against the marble pillar. He was always dressed impeccably in his dark, tailored suits. He never interrupted. He never made a sound. But I could feel his heavy, intense gaze burning into my skin. He was a monster to the outside world. He ordered assassinations. He controlled billions of dollars of illegal trade. But when he looked at his broken son, the cold Mafia king completely disappeared. He was just a desperate, heartbroken father. Chapter 3: The Monster's Vulnerability. Late one rainy night, I could not sleep. The massive mansion was silent. I slipped out of my suite and walked down to the sunroom. I just wanted to touch the piano keys to calm my anxiety. When I entered the dark room, a shadow moved by the window. I gasped, taking a step back. "Do not be afraid," Dante's deep, gravelly voice echoed in the dark. He was standing by the glass window, holding a crystal glass of whiskey. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark, dangerous ink of a cartel tattoo on his collarbone. He looked exhausted, rubbing his eyes with his free hand. "Mr. Castillo," I whispered respectfully. "I am sorry. I didn't know you were in here." "I could not sleep," Dante said. He turned to look at me. In the dim moonlight, his devastatingly handsome face looked softer. Less lethal. "Play something for me, Aria." I hesitated, but I walked over to the piano. I sat down and began to play a slow, beautiful, melancholy waltz. Dante walked over and leaned against the edge of the grand piano. He watched my hands move across the keys. "He touched your hand today," Dante said quietly over the music. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the keys. "Yes." Milo reached out and pressed the C chord with my finger. "It is a massive breakthrough. His brain is trying to connect the sound to the physical motion." Dante closed his dark eyes. He took a slow, deep breath. "They killed his mother right in front of him," Dante whispered into the dark room. The raw, violent pain in his voice made my chest ache. "He watched them shoot her. He has not spoken a single word since the blood hit the floor." I stopped playing. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. I looked up at the terrifying Mafia boss. For the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man drowning in an ocean of unbearable guilt. "Trauma is like a locked door, Dante," I said softly, using his first name without thinking. "You cannot break it down with a hammer. You have to find the right key." The music is slipping under the crack in his door. He is listening. Give him time. Dante opened his eyes. He looked at me. The intensity in his dark, beautiful gaze was so overwhelming that it made my breath catch. "You are not like the people in my world, Aria," Dante murmured, setting his whiskey glass down. He reached out slowly. His large, warm, calloused hand gently touched the side of my face. His thumb brushed against my cheekbone. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I should have pulled away. He was my captor. He was a criminal. But I leaned into his touch. I felt the dangerous, intoxicating heat of his skin. "You are fixing my broken world," Dante whispered, his face inches from mine. "And I don't know how to repay you. Just keep us safe, I breathed. With my life, he vowed. Chapter 4, The Gala and the Gunfire. 2 months later, the slow, beautiful healing process was violently interrupted. Dante was forced to host a massive, high-stakes gathering of cartel bosses and underworld elites at the estate. It was a mandatory show of power. The mansion was filled with hundreds of dangerous, heavily armed men and glamorous, ruthless women. Dante had commanded me to attend. He wanted to show his rivals that his home was perfect and controlled. I was dressed in a breathtaking, custom-made vintage black velvet gown. It clung to my curves and flared out at the waist. Diamonds glittered at my throat. I stood beside Dante in the grand ballroom. He had his hand resting firmly, possessively on the small of my back. Milo was upstairs, safely locked in his secure bedroom. The party was tense. I could feel the hostility in the room. A rival boss from the Southern Syndicate, a man named Vargas, kept staring at Dante with pure, poisonous hatred. Suddenly, the massive glass chandeliers above us flickered and died. The entire ballroom was plunged into pitch blackness. "Get down!" Dante roared. Bang! 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 The deafening, terrifying sound of automatic gunfire erupted in the dark. Screams echoed through the ballroom. Glass shattered. The rival syndicate had coordinated a massive, violent assassination attempt right inside the fortress. Dante's arm wrapped around my waist like an iron band. He tackled me to the marble floor, shielding my body entirely with his own massive frame as bullets chewed into the walls above us. "Milo!" I screamed in the dark, sheer panic seizing my chest. "Dante, Milo is upstairs." "Stay down." Dante commanded his guards, drawing a heavy black pistol from his tuxedo jacket. Dante didn't wait for his men. He dragged me up, keeping me behind his broad back, and we sprinted through the chaotic, screaming crowd. Dante fired his weapon with terrifying, lethal precision, dropping 2 rival gunmen who blocked the grand staircase. We ran up the stairs, our hearts pounding. The estate security alarms were blaring a deafening, high-pitched screech. We reached Milo's bedroom. Dante kicked the heavy door open. Milo was sitting on the floor, his hands clamped tightly over his ears, rocking back and forth in absolute, paralyzed terror. The loud gunfire and the screaming had triggered his darkest, most horrifying PTSD memories. He was trapped in the nightmare of his mother's murder. "Milo!" Dante yelled, dropping his gun and sliding across the floor to grab his son. "Look at me. You are safe." But Milo was completely unresponsive. He was hyperventilating, his eyes rolled back in pure panic. I dropped to my knees beside them. My beautiful vintage gown pooled on the floor. I knew exactly what to do. "Dante, let him go," I commanded urgently. "He can't breathe." Dante panicked. "Let him go," I yelled. Dante released his grip. I grabbed Milo's shaking hands. I did not speak. I began to hum. I hummed the exact, haunting melody of the sonata I played for him every day. I kept the pitch absolutely, perfectly precise. I hummed the notes into the chaotic, terrifying room, cutting through the blaring alarms. Milo stopped rocking. He blinked. His empty, terrified eyes slowly focused on my face. He recognized the melody. It was his safe harbor. It was his anchor. I kept humming, squeezing his hands tightly. Slowly, Milo's hyperventilating stopped. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He leaned forward and buried his face in my chest, wrapping his thin arms around my neck, crying silently. I held him tight, rocking him gently. I looked up. Dante was kneeling beside us, his gun resting on the floor. He was staring at me with a look of absolute, profound, earth-shattering awe. He realized in that moment that I was not just a music therapist. I was the absolute heart of his broken family. Chapter 5, The Unlocked Door. The rival attack was brutally crushed by Dante's elite security forces by dawn. The estate was placed on permanent, maximum lockdown. But inside the walls, everything had changed. The terrifying, cold Mafia king was completely gone. Dante treated me with a fierce, beautiful, intense devotion. We spent our evenings together in the sunroom. The slow-burn romance between us ignited into a deep, consuming fire. He kissed me in the shadows of the hallways. He held me tightly at night, confessing his darkest fears and his deepest regrets. I was no longer his prisoner. I was his equal. 3 months later, I was sitting at the grand piano, playing a soft, happy melody. Milo was sitting beside me on the bench, following my fingers with his eyes. Dante walked into the sunroom. He was not wearing his suit. He looked relaxed, wearing a dark sweater and jeans. He walked up to the piano and placed a heavy, thick manila envelope on the music stand. "What is this?" I asked, stopping my hands. "Open it," Dante said softly. I opened the envelope. Inside was a completely new identity package. There was a passport, a fresh social security card, and a bank statement showing $10 million deposited into a clean, untraceable account. "The medical debts are paid," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. "The gates to the estate are open, Aria. The guards have been ordered to let you pass." I stared at him in absolute shock. "You are letting me go?" Dante's dark eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing vulnerability. He reached out and gently touched my face. "I am a dangerous man, Aria," Dante whispered, his thumb brushing my bottom lip. "My world is violent and dark. I forced you into this golden cage because I was desperate to save my son. But I have fallen completely, hopelessly in love with you. And because I love you, I refuse to be your captor anymore. You are free." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the passport. I looked at the millions of dollars. I could walk out the door and never look back. I could return to my quiet, safe, invisible life. Then, I looked at Milo. The teenage boy, who had been completely mute for 5 years, slowly reached his pale hand out. He placed his hand gently over mine on the piano keys. Milo looked up at me. His silver gray eyes were finally clear and focused. "Stay," Milo whispered. His voice was raspy, broken, and incredibly quiet. It was the very first word he had spoken in half a decade. Dante let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Tears instantly flooded the terrifying Mafia king's eyes. He fell to his knees beside the piano bench, wrapping his arms around his son, burying his face in the boy's shoulder. I looked at the broken family that I had slowly, painstakingly tuned back to harmony. I looked at the man who would burn the world down to protect me, and the boy who had finally found his voice through my music. I picked up the fake passport. I picked up the bank statements. I tore them into pieces and dropped them onto the marble floor. I reached down and wrapped my arms around Dante and Milo, pulling them both into a fierce, beautiful embrace. "I am not going anywhere," I whispered, tears of joy streaming down my face. "I am already home." The end.
Thank you for listening to today's narrative. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button right now. It's the best way to help the channel grow. To never miss a release, subscribe to the Fiction feed and turn on notifications. See ya!